Okay, so let's see if I remember how to do this. I have been out of the pulpit for 3 weeks. You know, that's the first time since I've been at this church that I've been out for that long. But that's been good for several reasons, one of which is I seem to have gotten my ego at least partly detached from the outcomes of which direction the whole community decides to go or not go. That's probably healthy. Also, 3 weeks out of the pulpit allowed Jan to dig in with some depth to the Lord's Prayer. I've read all the sermons. In fact, I read them before you saw them or heard them. And they were wonderful. I mean, the first one, what did it do? It opened up the language, the possibility of the metaphors that were working in the Lord's Prayer so that you could just begin to get your imaginations into this, granted, ancient and in some ways odd prayer. And then the second week, she was able to take it and intertwine it with the 12 steps, as though the prayer is there as a vehicle that's going to help break the hold of addiction on people's lives, allow for freedom. And last week, it was a contemplative exercise that she was calling us all into this contemplative exercise that we could participate in the creation of God. But the use of this prayer to open up our hearts would help us participate in whatever it is that's next. There's one thing that hasn't happened since I've been gone. The world is not appreciably better than when I left. The world is simply not appreciably better than when I left. Our politicians are still all about self-interest. They're either interested in getting reelected for themselves or they're interested in getting something for their constituencies, which is self-interest. You know, the arguments that take place don't seem to have anything to do with creatively finding answers to rather complex problems. And we've got a few complex problems. People are feeling very skittish still about the economy. And one thing I know is I've been reading about the economy. I'm preaching Revelation in the fall. Believe it or not, it's all about power and economics. So I've been reading about economics. And you discover that macroeconomics is a field that is intensely argued. Very complex concepts are being argued from both sides. And somehow our politicians have managed to reduce it to just a few quick phrases. The world hasn't gotten appreciably better. I haven't noticed that everybody in the world has been flocking to their houses of worship, whatever that house may be, in order to commit their lives that they could contemplate that the next thing, the next beautiful thing that God would live out through them might take place. I haven't noticed that. No, hasn't gotten appreciably better, and I think Peter was a little frustrated with that too. He was speaking to a group of people that were frustrated and afraid, a little bit skittish, especially about their economic place in the world. The problem, of course, was they were Christians. And the reason that's a problem is it meant that they couldn't participate in the emperor's cult. Okay, the conflict of religions. The trouble is that the emperor's cult was also the bank. Okay, that was how the Roman Empire dealt with money. It was exchanged in the emperor's cult, in the religious places. And so if you weren't able to participate in that emperor's religion, well, then you really had a hard time participating in the economy. It would be like trying to go throughout life without a credit card. They had somehow been shunted aside, outcast. And the world did not seem to be getting appreciably better. In fact, this group of people also experienced physical persecution. And so in the midst of that, Peter advises them to be clothed with humility. Humility. He wants them to get smaller and less significant. They're already small and insignificant, and he wants them to get smaller and more insignificant, to be humble. Even though they are in the midst of some forms of suffering. I got to wonder about that strategy, don't you? That's not a natural strategy. You know, in fact, it opens you up to abuse. You know, people are abusing you, people are shunting you aside. What are you going to do? Oh, I think I'll get smaller. I'll just hide away from people. This is the kind of humility, this is the program that Peter has for us. When confronted with the problems of the world, with special interest politics, with the fading of our lives and our life forces, with the destruction of our relationships, we're going to get smaller. I don't know, it seems to me as though those are the moments when we want to stand up and get a little bigger. I mean, when we're meeting the political powers that are taking advantage of people, don't we want to form coalitions and gather our might together that we may influence the public debate and get everybody else to do what we think they ought to do? Or in our relationships, when we feel like we have been trounced upon, shunted aside, don't we want to build ourselves up, build that self-esteem back so that we can walk tall, not feel low and small and humble? Time to reassert, it would seem, when one is dealing with that. But Peter sees suffering entirely differently. And this may be a jump, so let's just give it a try. For Peter, suffering is that which exposes what is false in you. Suffering is that which exposes what is false in you. It exposes that false self within you. Let's take our country on the whole. Our country suffered on 9/11. We managed to be humiliated because it exposed the myth that we were powerful enough to take care of ourselves and save our citizens. That's what that moment in history did. It told us we weren't as powerful as we thought we were. We were humiliated. It exposed a false idea of who we are. Katrina, the storm, exposed a false idea of who we are, as though we can plan ahead for any eventuality. We've got everything in place so that, wow, we Americans, we take care of everything. It exposed the myth. It exposed what was false about ourselves.